And is everybody registered for the conference before I just give my shameless plug there? Uh,
Yes.
we uh, we would appreciate if you planning to come, you think you're coming and can book your lodging because we're trying to keep the numbers up because they're going to release some of the rooms next week. So there's still plenty of rooms, but all right. Now I will hand it over to Mary. And Mary, Asia and I are here for, we'll manage the chat. So if people want to put things in chat, they can do that. And if anybody has any technical questions, just let us know.
Great.
Thanks,
Good morning,
Mary.
everyone. Hi, I'm Mary Cleary's. I'm the founder and CEO of Studio 501. We're based in Minneapolis. But it's great to see so many people from all over the state. I'm originally from Cook, Minnesota, up in Lake Vermilion, and grew up there. And I actually just went on a Boundary Waters trip and got out the Sunday before they shut it down on Tuesday. So I was lucky to get a little trip in. So very sad for our community up there. Um, excuse me. But I am uh, just a little bit about Studio 501. We provide outsourced accounting services to nonprofit organizations, um, mostly here in the Twin Cities area, but we provide services. We have clients up in Duluth, and yeah, throughout the state as well as outside of the state as well. So we are nonprofit accounting experts. And I'm just honored to be a part of this little training this morning on internal controls. And I just welcome all questions. And we'll take questions as we go. So we'll just answer them. So just feel free to um, ask any questions, and I encourage you to do so. And even just share some uh, things you're doing within your organization so that we can all learn. So it can be kind of a collaborative type of presentation. So any questions so far that anybody has? All right. If not, we will jump in and get started. I have a little PowerPoint uh, uh, display up on our screen. So we'll just go through some slides. So this morning we're going to be talking obviously about internal controls for nonprofit organizations. And we'll first start off with um, just kind of what our hmm, uh, there we go. Just kind of the key learning objectives for this morning. We'll talk about what internal controls are and why they're important, especially with nonprofit organizations. How to design a strong internal control infrastructure. We'll talk about how you ensure compliance with an internal control structure, and then how we document and some suggestions for documenting those internal control processes. And then we'll have some time for some questions and answers. So we'll first start out with what are internal controls? They're policies and procedures uh, just set up to really protect the organization's assets and ensure accurate reporting as well as promote some compliance issues. So if your accounting data is accurate, meaning there's no errors and irregularities going on behind the scenes, then we can know that we're really compliant with any grant reporting or other reporting that you do externally or internally. And they act as checks and balances to prevent fraud, embezzlement, and human error. Um, and all of that, especially if you can communicate that you've got a sets of eyes on different transactions within your organizations, it definitely builds trust with your donors, grantors, the state of Minnesota grants, and the general public. So I think it's really great to be transparent that you are really um, mindful of having some checks and balances. And the whole idea why you do want kind of two sets of eyes on things and all transactions is to really, again, prevent fraud or any errors or irregularities, but also you protect the people that are involved in the financial structure. Because if things do go missing, or if there's errors or irregularities, they're going to look at the one person that has control over all of that. And if you can spread out that risk and protect everybody throughout the organization, it just it really helps uh, people feel confident that what they're doing is being checked, and that they're not going to be, I don't want to say blamed for any errors or irregularities. So it's not about a lack of trust, because I know we're all in very small organizations, but just having that checks and balances is just a key part of the internal control structure. And why are they important? And it's obvious. And I want to just say our little backgrounds here are all about water and summer. It's been so hot that I'm trying to give a little refreshing little about, although the weather today is just obviously beautiful and mild, but we're headed for some heat. But here we have a little pool and a little donut. Anyway, so why are they important? Preventing or reducing fraud and errors. Again, we talked about building donor and funder trust, the compliance issue. And if you have good internal controls, you can rely on your financial statements. So it supports sound decision making around your financial position. Accountability to government funding sources that we've talked about. And again, I can't stress enough, not putting people in vulnerable positions in the event there are errors or irregularities. And again, it's not about trusting people in their positions, it's just about protecting them. So that's a good reason to explain why you need those checks and balances. It's really to protect everybody in the organization.
Mary, I have a
Yes.
question. When we talk about ensuring legal compliance, is that like the generally accepted accounting practices, or is that like nonprofit legal things, or what?
Yeah,
Could you
it's
describe that a
more,
little bit more?
yeah, your legal compliances are all your reporting, how you're having to report things. So it's the Form 990. Again, if your financial statements are accurate and there's no errors and irregularities, you can ensure that your 990 is being compliant and filed accurately. The state of Minnesota, if you get enough donations, the Minnesota Attorney General oversees nonprofits in the state of Minnesota, and that annual report ensures compliance with that report, as well as compliance with your funder, any funding source. Again, you're reporting on how you're spending the money. And if those spending reports aren't accurate or contain errors or irregularities, you're not being compliant with accurate financial reporting. So
Thank
it's
you.
all those, stakeholders that you're reporting to and that you're accountable for: IRS, state of Minnesota, and then funders.
Mhm.
Any other questions at this point? Okay, so now we'll get into kind of the nitty gritty that I think all of you can relate to. And this is just how we design an internal control structure. So, as I said in an earlier slide, we want to have a lot of checks and balances. So that will take a number of people in your organization to kind of own some piece of the financial oversight. And these are 4 typical positions in probably your nonprofit. You have a board of directors, you have a board treasurer, you have an executive director or a leader of the organization, and then you might have a bookkeeper or finance staff. And maybe I'll just take a moment to ask the question, how many of you are actually doing the accounting? And if you do, or if you could answer the poll, even, do you outsource your accounting? Um,
So there are 3 questions. Yeah, make sure if you don't
yeah.
see it, then you could scroll down.
So if you, do outsource your accounting, um, and then we'll talk about, we're going to be talking about, internal controls around payroll, and how do you process your payroll? Do you do it in-house, or do you use a payroll service? And also, do you have any financial policies and procedures in place today? If you could answer those questions, that might be helpful. So, with those four areas that are on the screen right now, it talks about kind of maybe the overall roles and responsibilities of each. And this is how you can kind of design your internal control structure. So for the board of directors, they really are supposed to oversee they have a huge fiduciary responsibility. So they should be getting monthly financial statements so they can fulfill that fiduciary role. And they also approve an annual budget. Um, and they should formally um, review and approve uh, internal control policies as well. And they ensure independent oversight, review unedited monthly bank statements, or they can provide that double check on, or kind of that checks and balances over reviewing some bank statements um, or other pieces of review that we'll talk about later as well. So, but I also understand that a lot of small nonprofits have what's called a working board of directors where they're actually doing some of the work. For example, the treasurer may be doing some of the accounting, and we'll get into this next role. Um, so the treasurer usually conducts independent reviews of monthly bank reconciliations and financial reports. So they should be taking a deeper dive into the financial detail. They serve as a second reviewer approver on high dollar expenditures, and they act as a direct line of financial reporting to the full board. So ideally, the executive director or the finance staff should be meeting with the treasurer before a board meeting, making sure that they're well versed on the financial position and is able to present the financials to the board. Then the executive director obviously approves, not obviously, but they should be approving routine operational expenses and payroll, kind of enforcing the day-to-day policies and reviewing incoming mail checks before handing them over for entry. And that's a critical piece that you kind of segregate incoming mail and checks. Somebody else should be collecting those, the executive director or some type of administrative staff, and then hand them over to the accounting staff. That's a really good control and check. And then the bookkeeper and finance staff will obviously record transactions and ideally does not sign checks or have approval authority over bank transfers. So really kind of limiting their access to, again, moving money that is not authorized. Any questions about these roles and responsibilities? So these are ideal and kind of recommended. And this might be really good to even just communicate to your board and the board treasurer kind of what some of those roles are for a good accounting or a good internal control structure. I don't know why my slides aren't moving.
Mary, I have a question. This is Jen Kipka from CARE out in
Hi.
Foley, Minnesota. So what is your recommendation, as the executive director, the mail comes to me, I see the checks. And then for data entry, it typically is me that does that. Should that be someone else designated as another staff person? How do you foresee that? I came on board here in October as the director and, just kind of needing some guidance on what your recommendation might be, because it is something that I see the check and then I enter it. We do not have a finance staff, bookkeeper. I mean, we outsource our accounting.
Yeah. Yep. And again, that kind of puts you in a different, could be a difficult situation. So again, to protect you, Jen, from, just having a little checks and balances. If there's anybody, the easiest thing would be to have somebody else open the mail and when they see a check, to log the check on a log that you don't have access to. And then at some point, the treasurer or anybody can look at the log and then also look at, the accounting system and see that they kind of are in agreement that things that are getting logged are also, in the accounting system. So I would just have somebody else open the mail, log the check, and some type of log that is either locked somewhere that you don't have access to, so that nobody can manipulate the log.
Sure.
That would probably be the easiest, because it sounds like you are entering the transactions, and that's a little more complicated. So opening
And
the mail.
and how about if I'm looking for, looking for a check that I'm waiting to come in? It's a sponsor or it's my grant funding. How do I, without looking at the checks, the mail that's coming in, how do I know that? How would you know what I'm?
Yeah. Is there somebody else in the office? So like if you need to be opening the mail to see, again, probably with cash flow and everything, you want to get the checks, you want to get them deposited. Is there anybody else that you could just like open the mail with? Or
Yes.
yeah, have somebody there to say, hey, we're going to open the mail. Can you, have somebody there that can log it for you
And then
or
they
something?
can log it into, like, for example, our data bank.
Yeah.
Okay. Just
Yep.
thank you for that. I've always been a little wasn't sure. It seemed we do have a delineation of duties that we established last fall. But I still enter them, which I want to get away from, so.
Yeah. Right. The other thing is, who takes them to the bank? Like who
I
actually
had
takes them?
a board member, so
Oh,
he was
good.
designated as the depositor.
Right.
And then he takes it and does that role.
And then you can see
I
them.
do not sign any checks, so we also have the treasurer and someone else that can sign checks for the organization. I do not. So we really delineated those duties once when I came on board, literally.
Okay.
In the board, we made that decision just so that it was spread out and not just one person in control.
Right. No, that sounds like you're very mindful of kind of making sure you have those checks and balances. So thank you for sharing that, Jen. To that point about you not signing checks, I know it's very difficult. I mean, it can be really cumbersome if the executive director can't sign checks. So I do know a lot of executive directors that do have that ability to sign checks and produce them. And you can still do that and then set up other controls to kind of watch that. So the example would be if somebody else, your treasurer, could review the bank statement and approve that and the bank reconciliation so that they can see the checks that have cleared.
Yes.
And then that kind of protects you. So you could still sign the checks, or any executive director should be able to sign checks, because again, that's kind of something that needs to be done to have the treasurer come in and, sign them, or else, yeah, it can be cumbersome. So if all of you are struggling with trying to figure out who can sign checks, I think it's okay for the executive director to do that, but set up different controls to double check that. So
thank you.
Sure.
So two things. One is what I would say for us is that we have multiple signers on our bank account. We have our treasurer and our board chair and me. And then any payments that we need to make that fall within our budget, like rent and software and sort of the regular expenses that we know. One is those are set up for auto pay, so that I don't write those checks. And any checks that I write, I'm allowed to write, as long as, again, it fits within the budget and it's under a certain amount. And so if it's over a certain amount, then I have to have the treasurer sign it as well. So again, there's that trust that the budget is the working tool and that I'm paying for the operations, the cost of operations. And right, because if I had to have the treasurer do that, that would be a lot of extra work. And then I see Kelly posed a question that says, what the Rose Center does is take a photocopy of every check and cash that has been given or sent in just to cover ourselves. Is that a good working safeguard?
Yes. Yeah. So taking a picture, yeah, copying your checks is always a really good idea just to, yeah, for audit purposes or to go back to say, we're missing, that check didn't make it to the bank. What happened to it? But yeah, having a copy of checks is always recommended. Was there a second part of that question that I missed? Was it just,
I don't think
okay.
so.
Yeah.
Oh, there's another one.
Yeah, I definitely recommend copying checks. Don't copy cash. I've seen that happen too. I mean, you can, but it's just, yeah, it's not necessary to copy cash. Yeah, great questions. And we'll go into some things that were touched upon. We're going to review a little bit more too as well. So when you're looking at kind of like designing this internal controls of like what person should kind of do that checks and balances, you kind of want to see where, there might be errors or irregularities. And I don't want to say like fraud or embezzlement, but that can happen too. But so for example, if you collect a lot of cash, maybe you want to have two people count the cash and ensure the total amount is deposited and have another person obviously make the deposit, agree it with whoever counted the cash, have some type of total and have them initial it. So again, having two people together doing it kind of can mitigate any, irregularities. Another example of a policy to put in place, and we talked about this, is have two signatures on checks over a certain dollar amount. And then also a policy that, all cash and blank checks are stored in locked drawers or cabinets. So that's a really easy thing to institute to make sure, you're protecting that asset. The other one we touched upon again is just involve as many staff as you can and board and being that second set of eyes. So we mentioned this before also, just have the board treasurer review the bank reconciliation and bank statements. And again, you might want to have them tell them what to look for. It's one thing to just kind of look at it and sign off on it, but what they should be looking for is like unusual and large transactions. So if they see a $10,000 check go out, they should look to see who was that made out to. They should ask questions. Or if they see, every month there's this, $500 payment going out, a recurring payment, they might want to question that as well. So I think they just have to not only look at it, review it, but really kind of be really scrutinizing, like, do things look unusual? And it might also be helpful to have them look at the last year's or the last month's bank statement and the current one together so that they can kind of say, oh yeah, these all look pretty normal. So again, having some type of comparison. And then if they do have access to copies of canceled checks, that's also helpful. I can tell you many fraud instances where they'll get the check signed and then they'll change the name on who it's made out to. And that obviously will come through on a canceled check. So I think, looking at canceled checks is also a good way. And it can just be periodic, like maybe 4 times a year, they kind of do a spot check. It doesn't have to be every month. And then always report actual versus budget and explain variances, because this can be a really important tool. And as Kristen had mentioned, looking at your budget and staying within your budget really ensures that, okay, there's nothing really strange going on. If we budgeted for it, we probably are going to stay within that budget or be over. If you're over or under, then explain why that might be occurring. For example, if you hired a new person, it's pretty obvious you're going to be over on salaries, and you can explain that. But if you haven't made any hires and your salaries are over budget, you're going to want to research that. And that's another area of irregularities, is where there'll be wage theft. People are recording more time than was budgeted, or there may be a new employee on the payroll that nobody knows about. And that's a way that there can be errors and irregularities. So again, just looking at budget versus actual can highlight some fraud that might be occurring. Um, and then looking at the payroll register, looking for changes in pay and new employees. And again, if you can have somebody else review your payroll register, and not, again, it doesn't have to be every time, but occasionally. And again, comparing it to a prior month payroll or a prior period payroll to just make sure that there's some comparison so that they can see if anything is different. And then just segregating all financial tasks where possible. So, and that we talked about this with Jen. Again, the person that opens the mail shouldn't be the person recording it in the accounting software. So trying to find a way to segregate that. And like we had talked about logging checks, have somebody else make the bank deposit. And then the accountant shouldn't mail out checks and should not be the signer on bank accounts. So again, if you're preparing checks, it might be great to just have somebody else stuff the envelope and mail them. And that's another good, just load checks and balance. Okay, we're going to move into, well, I'll just stop right there. Any questions, concerns, anything anybody wants to share about what they're doing that works and that's easy and provides some type of checks and balances? Okay, if not, let's go to just compliance. And we touched upon this earlier as well. The state of Minnesota, they are conducting more audits and verifying grant compliance. And it's really not a matter of when you'll be audited, but when. So I think just making sure that one piece that they will look at and one thing you can promote is that you have financial policies and procedures in place. And they can be ensured that there are sets of eyes looking on things, checks and balances. So again, I think it will just help you sail through audits without a lot of issues. And again, that's that second point, having documented internal controls. Accurate financial reporting with good internal controls will also ensure compliance. And we touched upon this before as well with the IRS and other grants that you may receive. And just consistency on how you code things in the right line item, and knowing about the variances either to budget or year over year comparisons. So if you look at, they may look at 1 year compared to the other year. And if there's huge variances between line items, that may cause a red flag. So again, just trying to be really consistent on where you code certain expenses year over year is important. And that can be documented in some type of working manual as well. Like what I often do is download our chart of accounts and into a spreadsheet and then make a note of where things should live, where things are coded to next to the line item and kind of keep that. So anybody doing the accounting will kind of know, well, obviously rent will go to a rent expense, but if there's some type of where do we charge our a software subscription, where does that usually go? Does that go into office expenses or or does it go into technology? So I think just having some type of coding cheat sheet is always super helpful. And then establishing strong internal controls provides reassurance that donors and grantors are in good hands and being managed responsibly. And you just build donor trust. And I'll just step back and just explain a little bit further why internal controls, especially for nonprofits, are so important. Nonprofits get a lot of funding from the public and government sources, and you're being entrusted and it's expected that you are a good steward of those funds. And in order to do that, it's good to have these internal controls to make sure there are no errors or irregularities. And I'll compare that to a for-profit business. For example, my business, if somebody is, if they're committing wage theft on me or embezzling money or taking checks, the only person it affects is me. It's just affecting my bottom line, only my, profit. But again, with nonprofits, it's really not your money. It's kind of the public's money that they're entrusting. And that's why it's so important to have these internal controls in place, make sure things are accurate, there are no errors or irregularities, and to build that trust with the public and the donor, your donor base, and other stakeholders. Okay, so the next part of the presentation is just documenting the processes, and we're going to distribute kind of a sample policies and procedures that you can use to, if you don't have financial policies and procedures, that you can develop some policies and procedures around each of different areas. And these are 4 examples of areas that you want to cover. Budgeting, audits, and financial reporting, your control procedures, that you have good checks and balances over cash receipts and deposits, disbursements, contributions, bank reconciliations, all of that, that you have good controls over payroll. We've talked about the importance of that. And then even other policies such as a conflict of interest. I know within small organizations, there may be, board members, for example, that do business with each other, or they may do business with the nonprofit in some capacity, or there might be volunteers or employees that are married or know each other or have other personal interests, and to disclose those conflicts when there are decisions coming up to the board about either pay or other policies, that people disclose if there is a conflict of interest. So that's a very important document to have, and that kind of helps prevent errors and irregularities as well. Other considerations in the internal control structure, and I know Kristen mentioned this as well, just the use of technology, either, having, automatic payments, just auto pay for all those routine expenses. There's other tools also to automate your bill payment system. Like we use Bill for a lot of our clients. It's a bill payment system that syncs with QuickBooks, and it has really good internal controls, approval processes within that. But that's only if you're really processing lots of checks each month. If you're processing less than 20 checks a month, it's probably not worth having that automated system. But I think when you automate more things and have some approval processes in place, I think it enhances some transparency and helps you monitor the financial health a little easier. The appearance of having internal controls really helps prevent fraud as well. If people know that, again, if the cash collectors know that there's always 2 people counting the cash, or that there's somebody looking at the bank statement, just the fact that you have those policies in place can deter any errors or irregularities, because people know that there's lots of people, looking at things, and that things will be detected if there are errors. We talked about, documentation, but also documenting the approvals. So if your board treasurer is going to review the bank statement, they should initial it and sign off on it, initial it and date it, to indicate that they have approved, they have reviewed it and approved it. So again, document on all of your financial documents, and even if they're electronic, if they can, input their signature somehow on the bank statement, that is ideal. Or even just sending an email saying, I approve the bank statement, and keep a copy of that email. That's really important. And then we talked about security, just locking up anything that is of value, obviously cash and checks, but taking inventory of your computers to know how many computers you have. So those are things that can just walk out the door really easily without anybody knowing, especially if you have extra computers. And also just, I can't stress enough, just background checks on employees is really a preventable way of reducing, fraud or irregularities, both doing criminal and credit checks. And and I'm sure many of you have heard stories of fraud where, there's usually sometimes a reason why they're committing the fraud. It's a gambling addiction or some other type of criminal background that could have indicated that um, there might be issues. So highly recommending both a criminal and credit check on employees, especially any employees handling any part of the financial
Mary,
aspect of a nonprofit. Yeah.
I was wondering when you were talking about payroll, because I saw that there were a few people who do payroll in-house. Um, and I guess I don't know how that works, but is there a specific, you have recommendations, I guess, for how they kind of manage that because when you're not outsourcing it, then you sort of lose that sense of the controls being in place.
Yeah. Yeah. Doing in-house payroll can definitely, I mean, you think you have more control over the process and it may save you money as far as not having to pay a payroll service to do it. But um, uh, you still have to figure out how you can get like a payroll register and somebody to approve all those things. But having a third party payroll service, I highly recommend. In fact, I always recommend that for all of our clients. We don't do Studio 501 will not do the payroll. We can process the payroll through a third party payroll service. And a third party payroll service, some examples are like ADP or Paychex and Gusto. And now Gusto is a really good one. We really like them because it's inexpensive, super easy to use. Um, and the great thing about that is that they'll pay all your taxes and file all your quarterly forms and produce your W-2s. You really don't even have to think about any of that. And I feel I mean, that's what they do, and they do it really well, and they do it very efficiently. And the cost of it is very, I think, extremely reasonable. It also will onboard you, like Gusto. It'll send the new hire report to the state. It'll send them an invitation where the employee can put in their bank account information to have direct deposit. It's really just hands off. I mean, all of these new services are using technology in a way that just really makes it painful for especially small organizations. And then it also produces, great reporting that can get approved, but it also would allow people to even enter their time, and then have somebody approve that time before payroll. So again, it does have some of those checks and balances to approve pay. But if you are doing it in-house, I would kind of take a look at that to see if maybe outsourcing it to a third party would be great. The other thing that I worry about an internal control piece, especially your board should be concerned about this too. Uh, there's one thing the IRS can come after board members for, and it's only one thing, and it's not paying your payroll taxes. And I've had a client do that. They were doing their payroll in-house. Cash flow was tight. They didn't make their payroll tax payments. And that's that Social Security and Medicare that you have to forward to the government, and withholding, because we take out money from people's paychecks for withholding, and that's supposed to go to the government as well. And this client wasn't sending their tax payments in, and they actually froze the bank accounts of the entire board of directors, all of their bank accounts, personal bank accounts, until the payment was made. So and that's again why using a third party payroll service is just so vital in that instance, that your payroll taxes are going to be paid and automatically, and they're pulling that money out of your bank account and making sure that that's filed. So and it's also trusting your payroll service. There have been payroll services that have not paid payroll or like those tax payments to the federal or state. So make sure that if you are looking at outsourcing your payroll, that it's a reputable payroll service. Do a lot of background check on it. If it's your local town accountant wanting to do your payroll, make sure that those tax payments are being made. Make sure you get proof of the tax payments. that it's coming out of your bank account. It could be coming out of your bank account and going to them, but yeah, just verifying that you have got some verification on payroll taxes being paid. Any questions about that? Did that answer your question, Kristen? Just, yeah,
Yes,
it's a
thank you.
very big deal. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I cannot stress enough, looking at budget to actual, and this is a stat I pulled that there's a 60% reduction in financial losses when boards receive regular budget reports that show variances between budget and actual. So your board of directors should be getting minimally quarterly reports, ideally monthly reports that show budget to actual, and significant variances are explained. Um, and in fact, I'll tell you another story of somebody I knew that was creating their budget, and they padded it. They were padding all the line items. So they created a budget that was, highly, padded, which is fine. It's good to have a little cushion in line items. But the reason they were doing that was to make sure that they were always within budget. And again, doing that kind of just really negates the importance that a budget can play in that internal control structure. So by having a budget that's realistic and really is a guide on what you really think you're going to spend, it never turns out to be exactly how you plan, but it needs to be realistic in order to be a really good benchmark to actuals, to again possibly identify potential fraud. So again, make sure your budget is realistic and is really kind of the plan that you have for the year. And things always change, like I said, but padding it extensively kind of negates the tool that can play or the role that can play in the internal control structure. Okay, we're kind of wrapping it up. So just kind of to summarize, strong internal controls can really help your place reduce the chances of errors and irregularities. And again, really important in just maintaining that trust with the community. And we're going to we'll send you out that financial policies and procedures manual that you can customize to yourself. It's about 10 pages long. There might be areas that you can just weed through and exclude, but I think it does lay out a really good, it covers all the majority of areas that should be covered in a financial policy and procedure. We'll open up to questions. All right.
I think it would be good to hear where people think maybe they have a challenge, or like where like there's something that stood out today that they thought, oh, either we don't do anything in that sort of space or we do it differently. Because again, there are different ways to do things. Not everything is as precise, right? There's, especially in different size organizations, there's different ways to do things.
I see a question in the chat that I kind of had, which doesn't answer what you were just talking about, Kristen.
Oh, sure.
But you had mentioned about doing background checks and credit checks. How do you have a recommendation on how to do a credit check?
Yeah, I think with a lot of, and I'll have to double check because my operations manager takes care of that piece, but I think there is there's sometimes an option when you go with a background credit check, background check, that you can opt to have also the credit check at the same time. So you might want to look at who you're contracting with to do the background checks and say, can you add on the credit check? And I know it is an additional fee, but they can do both at the same time. So it's the same it would be the same providers that would do your background check.
I'm the one that posed the question in the chat. Being a new director, it wasn't being, I don't see evidence of where that's in their employee files. So I'm really looking to these other organizations on who they use for background checks. I mean, that makes sure that it complies with DHS. Because when I met with DHS last year, that is why we created the delineation of duties during our audit visit, was they wanted clear evidence on how we were delineating those duties. So that was not a red flag, but a strong it'll give you a month to kind of come up with delineation of duties. And that's hence why I say I have some of that deposit. They didn't want me on writing the checks. And so that was their recommendation. But the background checks, I want to know who you guys utilize that complies with what DHS is looking for. Right now we use a free background check for our volunteers, but does anyone have any recommendations on what they're using, for their employees? Because it's clear that is something that needs to be done on my end. Anybody use anyone?
We've asked this question before.
Okay.
And I know that a lot of them use the BCA, so the Bureau of Criminal.
Okay.
Is that right? Where you can just do and that's just their state criminal background check. Again, that's the free one. But there's also a company called Checker, and they do background checks. And I was just looking at their, and that costs more money, but then you get more information. I see that Kelly says they use McDowell, so that's another one. Sort of related, I do think that our insurance company will be requiring sort of proof of background checks, not necessarily like documented proof, but some sort of affirmation that it's been done. And so it's possible that we at the network might be able to negotiate, again, using our buying power, if we know we all have to do it, to say, there's 33 organizations or 34 organizations that would use this. Can they give us, a good price to keep that cost down? Okay. And Wendy, to your point, how often the background checks, I think some of that's going to come from our insurance company. I've looked over the DHS contract, and I don't see that they provide any direction on that. However, I would say that there probably are some assumptions that the state makes, or that most people would make, which is any organization working with vulnerable adults, which would be working with children or working with disabled people or older adults, does background checks on all their staff, and volunteers for sure. Anybody who interacts with with your clients should have a background check and know if there's any red flags. But I did see the question, what should we be looking for in a credit check when we're doing a credit check on employees?
Yeah, good point. That's a really good question. And yeah, you have to establish like what level you're comfortable with. I mean, I think, good and fair credit, it can be excellent, good and fair maybe, but if it's poor, that may just be, again, it's information for you to maybe have. And if they're not in a financial capacity I think you can make that decision. But I think it's more giving you information to be aware. So I think it is good to go into it saying anybody with a poor credit check, maybe you don't hire, or if you do, make sure they have no financial responsibilities. So setting the policies around that. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Well, I think too, I mean, like you said, it's a point of data, a point of information that you get from the other background check. But I also think, and when I guess I last hired Asia, but in my other job, I like made a decision just personally, I mean professionally, but individually, that I would look at people's LinkedIn information, but that I would not sort of look at any social media things, any other like Facebook or Instagram. And so I think that again, that can be a policy within an organization about like where are you gathering your data, right? Not only in this background check and this credit check, but where do you decide not to go look that isn't important or isn't relevant, that you know that would give you data that maybe shouldn't or isn't even legally allowed to be sort of included in some of those decision making, when hiring somebody. Um, and then Deborah asked it's a good question too about, what about doing background checks on board members?
Yeah, I haven't, they are volunteers. They again, I think you can develop a policy about that. If they're not around children and vulnerable adults, if they're not involved in the financial uh process, you may want to have a policy that you do a background check on a treasurer.
Mhm.
That would be a bad policy to have. And I know the policies and procedures we're sending you, the last page, it does talk about background checks. And
Mhm.
you can put some of those, like Kristen, some of those things, those guidelines. And again, I think just having a policy that is not, doesn't take a lot of time, but yet ensures the organization and protects the organization. Um,
Mhm.
and you're not going to prevent all fraud, and you're not going to prevent all, um, you know, people with bad credit or background checks, that things might slip through the cracks. But I think just being very mindful and setting up processes to just reduce the incidents, to reduce it and to make it, less frequent or reduce the chance of it occurring is the best we can do. So
Mhm.
just do our best, and having a good policy in place and following that policy is doing the best that we can.
And I think too, it's that, I mean, in some of these instances, I think maybe Jen, like in your case, I mean, your treasurer is writing checks. And if that person is the only person looking at the check and is also the person looking at the bank statements, first of all, I'm not sure that that's a good separation of duties. I'm not sure if that's the case, but there should be. I would think that you would do a background check on, especially because of the the deep engagement with with the
Yeah.
finances, right? They're not just looking at your bank statements, but they're managing cash.
For some reason, there's such pushback from our board to do background checks. Now, the ones that are actually volunteering, transporting clients, you know, we've already done them, right? We do a free background check. That's what we've went with. But I tell you, the board really has a hard time giving up any personal information to do something such as a background check, and it's very frustrating as I come on board, and there has been resistance. They find it I struggle to find the right word, but very hesitant.
Invasive. Yeah.
Yeah, they find it invasive and they do not
Mhm.
want to do it. So that is a challenge I face. Like I said, the ones that are actually meeting with the clients, but we've had our treasurer has been with us since inception. So, 17 years plus, well, even longer than that, but it's really hard to work with to get everybody on board, literally.
That's why you make a policy and then it's not
Yeah,
personal. It's like this is
right.
what's in the best interest of the organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know it's a delicate, yeah, you walk a delicate, yeah, it's a fine line because it's hard to get board members and they're volunteering their time. And then when you want to also get background checks, that's just another thing that they're giving so much already. But I
Yeah.
think it's all about selling it and marketing it, and also like just saying, you know what, we've got to protect you. We really, or protect the organization, that this is not about you. It's not personal. This is a policy that's really going to ensure and even just blame it on the state. The state really requires that anybody handling money,
Yes.
we need to do these checks. But yeah, but I also, if the treasurer is doing all of that, then the board chair or somebody has to be reviewing the bank statement, reviewing checks being written, having some
Yeah,
oversight. So yeah.
She doesn't, but I mean, she writes the checks, but then the account goes through the reconciliation and things like that. So thankfully, we delineated that duty last year. So when I came on board, our audit was like 10 days later. So I learned quickly and aggressively things we needed to change.
Yep.
Good times.
We're just a little bit over, but unless people have more questions, Mary, I wanted to say thank you. Yes, and then this was what I wondered. I forgot that you had a slide for that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So I'm offering to all of you, if you have any questions or want me to review your financial policies and procedures, or if you have any questions, especially there's ways if you're using QuickBooks to track restricted grants and restricted money. And I know I've worked with, Catherine and her organization on an easy way to do that and be really clear. I'm offering, 30-minute consultation. I use Calendly to schedule meetings, and you're able to use that link that's up here, or else just simply email me and we can get something scheduled.
I think because they can't click on that link, but I
don't think so. I didn't make it a live link. Yeah, sorry. You could put it in the chat, or let me see. I can put it in the chat.
I don't know why it's so. Oh, I think it's dark. You can click on it, but I think it's dark because I copied it from. Let's see. Copy link here. I think I can do it this way. There you go.
Oh, did you copy it?
Yeah. I mean, and so okay. What I would also say is, we'll send, I guess, the recording, because why not? The recording, and Mary, if it's okay that we share these slides.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the policy template that Mary has created for us. So we'll send all of that out. Today's Thursday, maybe tomorrow or Monday. And so you'll have all of that information as well as her contact information. So
yeah, and I also just wanted to mention that we're going to be posting this information. We're sending it out, but we're posting the links on Membership Works. So if you don't have a login for that yet, contact me and we'll get you set up so that you can actually access the videos and stuff afterwards.
Right. As well as the recording we did for the fundraising webinar. That'll all be in Membership Works. So yeah. Thanks, Mary.
You're welcome. I hope this was helpful. Give you a few things to think about, consider. Yeah, it was a pleasure being part of the meeting this morning. Thank you so much for having me, Kristen.
We're grateful for caring about all of this. All of these organizations, they do such amazing work in their communities, and you and I have talked about it. So I'm glad you got to meet some of the players.
Yeah, for sure. And Studio 501, we really just love this nonprofit sector and the ways so many nonprofits like you all are just helping to make our community stronger. And we love being a part of it. Yeah. That's why we love doing the work. It brings us great joy. So I was honored, Kristen, that you asked me to do this, because I think I just want to do my part in making this sector a stronger place. So I was happy to be a part of this. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.